Somerset lined up the lead truck in his gun sight. 850 caliber machine guns sat packed into the Thunderbolt's wings, twice the firepower of any other American fighter. He squeezed the trigger, and the aircraft shuddered as all 8 guns roared to life simultaneously. A storm of armor-piercing rounds tore into the convoy below. Vehicles erupted in flames. Men scattered. In seconds, a disciplined military formation transformed into chaos and fire. No one in the 365th Fighter Group knew that one pilot's defiance that morning would rewrite the battlefield equation on the Western Front, turning what the Germans had mockingly called the Juggernaut into their most feared airborne adversary. Merrill Somerset wasn't born to fly. He entered the world on July 4, 1922, in Millfield, Ohio, where coal dust and hard work defined existence. His father operated a small grocery store that barely survived the Depression, and young Merrill spent his childhood helping stock shelves and deliver goods to miners' families who often couldn't afford to pay. The Somerset family's small white clapboard house sat near the railroad tracks, and Merrill would pause in his chores to watch the trains thunder past, dreaming of where they might be going. "Those tracks were my first horizon," he would later write to his mother. "But then I looked up and realized the sky had no limits at all." Okay. The local library became his sanctuary, particularly books about aviation. While other boys played baseball, Somerset built model airplanes from scraps of balsa wood and paper, studying aerodynamics through trial and error. His high school physics teacher, Mr. Hastings, noticed the boy's aptitude and encouraged him to consider engineering school. "You've got a mind for mechanics," Hastings told him, "and a heart that seems pulled toward the clouds." Somerset had just started classes at Ohio State when Pearl Harbor was attacked. By December 12, 1941, he was standing in a recruitment office volunteering for the Army Air Corps. His mother had wept at his decision, but his father had simply gripped his shoulder and said, "Make it count, son." Training wasn't kind to Merrill Somerset. At 5 feet 7 inches and 150 pounds, he was smaller than most cadets. His working-class accent and reserved demeanor made him an outsider among the college men and wealthy sons who dominated the pilot candidate pool. During basic training at Maxwell Field in Alabama, drill instructors singled him out for extra push-ups and verbal dressing downs. "You think a grocer's boy belongs in the cockpit of America's most advanced aircraft?" one instructor barked during a particularly grueling session. "You think the skies are just another shelf to be stocked?" Somerset never responded to the taunts. He simply completed each task with quiet determination, finishing near the top of his class in academics and flight aptitude. When he first took the controls of a training aircraft, something clicked. The machine responded to his touch as if it were an extension of his body. What he lacked in natural confidence, he made up for in precision and mechanical intuition. "Somerset flies like he's having a conversation with the aircraft," one flight instructor noted in his evaluation. "Quiet but clear. The plane listens." After earning his wings, Somerset was assigned to the 365th Fighter Group, the Hell Hawks, slated for deployment to Europe. The unit was among the first to receive the new Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and reactions were decidedly mixed. Pilots who had trained on lighter, more nimble aircraft like the P-40 Warhawk looked at the massive Thunderbolt with skepticism. "This thing is a bus, not a fighter," complained one pilot during their first briefing. "The Germans will fly circles around us." At over 17,000 pounds fully loaded, the P-47 was indeed the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine gave it impressive straight-line speed and tremendous diving ability, but pilots worried about its climbing rate and maneuverability in a dogfight. Somerset, however, found himself drawn to the aircraft's brutal functionality. During his first flight, he discovered that while the P-47 lacked the balletic grace of other fighters, it possessed a raw power and solidity that inspired confidence. The 850 caliber machine guns in its wings delivered a concentrated punch unmatched by any other American fighter, and, unlike the more delicate aircraft, the P-47 was built to take punishment. "She's not pretty," Somerset wrote in his journal after his 5th training flight. But neither is a sledgehammer, and they both get the job done. By the time the 365th deployed to England in November 1943, Somerset had logged over 100 hours in the Thunderbolt and developed a deep respect for the aircraft others still derided as the Juggernaut. He named his plane Detroit Iron, painting the name below the cockpit alongside the emblem of a sledgehammer. The Battle of the Bulge erupted on December 16, 1944, when Hitler launched a massive surprise offensive through the dense Ardennes forest. The German attack created a massive bulge in the Allied lines, threatening to split the American forces and potentially change the course of the war. Heavy cloud cover and snow grounded most Allied aircraft during the critical early days of the battle, allowing German armor and troops to advance rapidly. The weather on December 17th was particularly brutal, with low clouds, fog, and intermittent snow creating near impossible flying conditions. Allied air commanders had ordered all fighter groups to stand down, unwilling to risk aircraft and pilots in such dangerous conditions. The 365th Fighter Group, stationed at a forward airfield near Metz, France, sat grounded, pilots gathered around stoves in their tents, listening to radio reports of the German advance. Major Warren Halsey, the squadron commander, called his pilots together for a briefing at 0700 hours. "Intelligence reports multiple German convoy movements in this sector," he said, pointing to a map of northern France. "They're moving fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements to their forward units. If we could hit them, we'd blunt the entire offensive, but with this ceiling." He gestured upward, where low clouds obscured everything above 2,000 feet. Somerset studied the map, noting the convoy routes. "Sir, what about flying under the ceiling, hug the deck all the way to the target?" "Negative," Halsey replied firmly. "Too risky. Visibility is under a mile in some areas. We'd lose half the squadron to hills and power lines before we even saw the enemy." The men were dismissed to their alert stations with orders to monitor the weather. By midday, most had resigned themselves to another day on the ground. Somerset, however, kept walking to the flight line every 30 minutes, studying the clouds, feeling the wind direction, watching for any change. At 14:30 hours, he noticed a subtle shift. The cloud base had lifted slightly, and a pattern of breaks was moving in from the west. Returning to the operations tent, he found it nearly empty. Most pilots had gone to the mess hall. Only his wingman, Lieutenant Harold Gunderson, was present, writing a letter home. "Look at this," Somerset said, unfolding a map across the table. "Intelligence puts a major German convoy here near St. Vith. They'll be resupplying the 6th Panzer Army. If the weather window I'm seeing continues to move east, we could get a shot at them in about an hour." Gunderson frowned. Halsey said to stay put. Halsey said the ceiling was too low. "It's lifting." Somerset traced a route on the map. "If we follow this valley, stay below 1,000 feet, we can approach from the south where they won't be expecting us." 2 planes against a protected convoy? Gunderson raised an eyebrow. "That's suicide." "Merrill, not with what this bird can do," Somerset replied. "One pass is all we need, 850s hitting them from behind. We could halt the entire German advance in this sector." Gunderson hesitated, then set his pencil down. "Halsey will have our wings for this." "Only if we're wrong," Somerset said, already reaching for his flight gear. 20 minutes later, the 2 Thunderbolts roared down the runway, their massive propellers biting into the cold air. They flew west at first, climbing to 800 feet to clear the hills, then turned north following a river valley that would lead them toward the German lines. Somerset flew in the lead, his eyes constantly scanning between the map on his knee, the terrain ahead, and the fragments of sky visible through breaks in the cloud cover. They flew in radio silence, communicating only with hand signals. When they crossed into territory where German troops were active, they dropped to just 300 feet above the ground, the Thunderbolt's powerful engines echoing off the hillsides. Farmers in fields looked up in surprise as the massive fighters roared overhead. After 40 minutes of tense flying, they approached the area where intelligence had placed the German convoy. Somerset signaled to Gunderson to spread out, giving them a wider search pattern. For 10 minutes, they saw nothing but empty roads and snow-covered fields. Somerset was beginning to think they'd missed their opportunity when he spotted movement in a narrow valley to the east. There it was, a massive column of vehicles, over 50 trucks, half-tracks, and fuel tankers, moving north toward the front. They were packed tightly on the narrow road, unable to disperse because of the steep terrain on either side. Somerset couldn't have asked for a better target. He signaled to Gunderson, pointing toward the convoy, then made a strafing motion with his hand. His wingman nodded, understanding the plan instantly. They would approach from the rear, where the vehicle's armor was thinnest, and rake the entire column with their machine guns. Somerset banked his Thunderbolt away, gaining separation to set up the attack run. The two planes climbed to 1,000 feet, then turned back toward the convoy, approaching from the south with the weak winter sun at their backs. The Germans below had no idea they were there. At half a mile out, Somerset pushed his throttle to full military power. The P-47's massive engine roared in response, pushing him back in his seat. He lined up the rear of the convoy in his gun sight and began a shallow dive. At 400 yards, he squeezed the trigger. All 8 50-caliber machine guns opened fire simultaneously, each one capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. The concentrated storm of armor-piercing bullets tore into the rear vehicles of the convoy. Somerset could see the rounds punching through metal, shattering glass, igniting fuel. The last 3 trucks erupted in flames almost instantly. He held the trigger down, walking his fire forward along the length of the convoy as his Thunderbolt roared just 100 feet above the road. German soldiers scattered for cover, some firing uselessly with small arms. A fuel truck took a direct hit and exploded with such force that Somerset felt the concussion rock his aircraft. Gunderson followed 30 seconds behind, his guns targeting vehicles Somerset had missed. The convoy was now in complete chaos, burning vehicles blocking the road, troops running in all directions. As Somerset pulled up at the end of his run, banking hard to come around for another pass, he saw that nearly half the convoy was already destroyed or disabled. 2 German Bf-109 fighters appeared from the north, likely responding to frantic radio calls from the convoy. Somerset signaled to Gunderson to break off and head for home. They had accomplished their mission, and tangling with enemy fighters in these conditions would be pushing their luck too far. As they turned southwest, Somerset looked back at their handiwork. Black smoke rose from at least 20 burning vehicles, visible even through the scattered clouds. The convoy was completely halted, the road blocked in multiple places. Those supplies would never reach the German front lines. Back at base, they expected to face severe discipline for disobeying orders. Instead, they found their squadron commander waiting with intelligence officers who had intercepted German communications about the attack. The convoy had been carrying critical fuel reserves for an entire panzer division. Without those supplies, the German advance in that sector had ground to a halt. Major Halsey still reprimanded them for breaking the chain of command, but there was a gleam of respect in his eyes. "Next time," he said, "take the whole damn squadron." What Somerset and Gunderson demonstrated that December day was more than personal courage. It was proof of the P-47 Thunderbolt's devastating effectiveness as a ground attack aircraft. The plane the Germans had once mocked as too heavy and ungainly had become their greatest airborne threat. The roots of the P-47 Thunderbolt stretched back to the late 1930s, when Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, began work on a lightweight interceptor designated the XP-47. But as reports from the European war filtered back to America, the Army Air Corps realized they needed something far more substantial to to combat the Luftwaffe. Kartveli completely redesigned the aircraft around the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial beast that produced over 2,000 horsepower. To harness this power effectively, he incorporated a revolutionary turbo supercharger system that compressed thin, high-altitude air for the engine, giving the P-47 exceptional performance above 25,000 feet. The resulting aircraft was enormous by fighter standards. With a wingspan of 40 feet and a length of 36 feet, the P-47 dwarfed other fighters of its era. Fully loaded, it weighed over 17,000 pounds, more than twice as much as the Bf-109s and FW-190s it would face in combat. Army procurement officers were initially skeptical. "You've built a flying safe," one reportedly commented upon seeing the prototype. But Kartveli defended his design, arguing that the aircraft's size allowed for unparalleled armor protection, fuel capacity, and firepower. And firepower was where the P-47 truly excelled. While most American fighters carried 4 or 6 machine guns, Kartveli packed 8 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns into the Thunderbolt's wings. Each gun could fire up to 800 rounds per minute, giving the aircraft a combined rate of fire of 6,400 rounds per minute, a veritable storm of lead that could shred anything in its path. Production began in 1941, and by early 1943, P-47s were arriving in England to join the 8th Air Force. Their initial role was escorting bomber formations over occupied Europe, a task for which their high-altitude performance and heavy armament seemed well suited. But early combat encounters revealed both strengths and limitations. The P-47 could dive faster than any Luftwaffe fighter, reaching speeds over 500 miles per hour in a steep descent. Its rugged construction allowed it to absorb significant battle damage and still return home. But its massive weight made it a slower climber than the German fighters, and its initial models lacked the range to escort bombers all the way to distant targets like Berlin. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to deal with the Thunderbolts, using their more nimble aircraft to climb above the Americans, then diving down for quick attacks before zooming back up out of reach. German pilot Franz Stiegler later recalled his first encounter with the P-47. "We thought they were easy meat," he said in a post-war interview, "so big and slow to roll. We called them flying barrels, but if you got caught in their gun sights, even for a second they would tear your aircraft to pieces, and trying to follow a Thunderbolt in a dive was suicide." As newer, longer-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang arrived in theater, many P-47 groups were gradually reassigned to ground attack duties where their firepower, ruggedness, and diving ability could be put to better use. By early 1944, Thunderbolts were increasingly configured as fighter bombers, carrying bombs or rockets under their wings in addition to their formidable gun armament. It was in this ground attack role that the Thunderbolt truly found its calling. German troops soon learned to fear the distinctive sound of the P-47's massive radial engine. Unlike the liquid-cooled engines of most fighters, which could be disabled by a single bullet to the coolant system, the Thunderbolt's air-cooled radial could continue running even with several cylinders damaged or destroyed. The P-47's transformative impact on the battlefield became increasingly apparent throughout 1944. As Allied forces pushed inland from the Normandy beaches, Thunderbolts roamed ahead of the advancing troops, seeking out German vehicles, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. The scale of destruction they wrought was staggering. From D-Day until the German surrender, P-47 pilots claimed the destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. While these figures include claims from all Allied fighter bombers, the Thunderbolt was responsible for the majority. One particular engagement demonstrated the devastating power of the P-47 against ground targets. On July 29, 1944, during Operation Cobra, Pilots from the 405th Fighter Group discovered a German column trapped between advancing American armored divisions near Rancy, France. From mid-afternoon until dusk, they hammered the column relentlessly. Ground investigators later found 66 tanks, 204 vehicles, and 11 artillery pieces destroyed, the work of just 16 aircraft over a 6-hour period. The morning after his unauthorized mission against the German convoy, Lieutenant Somerset found himself summoned to group headquarters. Still expecting formal disciplinary action, he was surprised to be ushered into a briefing room filled with pilots from all 3 squadrons. Colonel Martin Hayes, the group commander, stood at the front, pointing to reconnaissance photographs taken that morning. "Gentlemen, what you're looking at is the result of Lieutenant Somerset's little adventure yesterday," Hayes announced. The photos showed the smoking remains of the convoy, now being examined by American infantry, who had advanced into the area. 37 vehicles destroyed, including 6 fuel tankers and 4 ammunition trucks. Intelligence confirms this was the primary resupply column for elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. Without these supplies, their advance has stalled completely. The room remained silent, all eyes moving between the photos and Somerset, who stood uncomfortably by the door. "The conventional wisdom," Hayes continued, "has been that our Thunderbolts are too large and vulnerable for low-altitude attacks in poor weather. Lieutenant Somerset just proved that conventional wisdom wrong. What he demonstrated, at considerable risk to himself, is that the P-47's firepower makes it possible to completely neutralize a target in a single pass, minimizing exposure to ground fire." Hayes turned to face Somerset directly. "You disobeyed direct orders, Lieutenant, and that can't be overlooked. Consider yourself officially reprimanded." Then a slight smile crossed his face. "Now tell these men exactly how you did it." For the next hour, Somerset walked through every detail of the mission, the approach route, the attack angle, the altitude, the timing of the gun bursts. By afternoon, the 365th had completely revised its ground attack tactics, emphasizing the devastating potential of the P-47's 8-gun battery against vehicle columns. 3 days later, on December 20th, the weather cleared enough for the entire group to launch a coordinated strike against German supply lines. 48 Thunderbolts swept across the countryside in flights of 4, hunting for enemy convoys. By day's end, they had destroyed over 100 vehicles and effectively severed the supply lines to 3 German divisions. Word spread quickly to other P-47 groups. Within weeks, new tactical directives were circulating throughout the 9th Air Force, emphasizing the lessons learned from Somerset's strike. Approach from the rear of convoys where vehicles couldn't disperse, attack along the length of the column to cause maximum blockage, and utilize the concentrated firepower of the 850 caliber guns to ensure destruction in a single pass. German forces quickly felt the impact of these new tactics. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt later wrote in his memoirs that the Allied fighter bombers had become the Black Plague for German ground forces. "We could hide from their bombers in the forests," he noted, "but the fighter bombers found us everywhere. Movement during daylight became nearly impossible." A captured German transport officer told interrogators in January 1945, "It is the Thunderbolts we fear most. The others we hear them and can take cover. But the Thunderbolts appear suddenly, shooting everything with those terrible machine guns. One moment a column is moving, the next it is burning wreckage." As winter turned to spring in 1945, the tactical relationship between Allied ground forces and their supporting aircraft had evolved into a devastatingly effective partnership. P-47 groups were often assigned to specific Army divisions, responding to direct requests from ground commanders within minutes. Radio operator Samuel Kramer of the 4th Armored Division recalled, "We'd run into a pocket of German resistance, call in the coordinates, and before we could finish a cigarette, Thunderbolts would be there, tearing it apart. They called it cab rank, fighters circling overhead, just waiting for a call. like taxis at a stand. On March 24, 1945, Somerset led a flight of 4 Thunderbolts supporting the advance of the 90th Infantry Division near Mainz, Germany. Forward observers reported a German counterattack forming in a wooded area with at least 15 tanks and several hundred infantry preparing to strike the American flank. Within 7 minutes of receiving the call, Somerset's flight was circling the coordinates. The German forces were well concealed among the trees, but recent rain had turned the forest floor to mud, and vehicle tracks were visible leading into the woods. Somerset directed his pilots to arm their 5-inch rockets, a recent addition to the Thunderbolt's arsenal. Each aircraft carried 8 rockets, designed specifically for piercing armor. They would attack in sequence, targeting the areas where the tank tracks disappeared into the tree line. Somerset went in first, firing 2 rockets into a dense stand of pines. The explosions blew vegetation apart, revealing the angular shape of a camouflaged Tiger tank. He immediately followed with a gun pass, the 850s hammering the exposed rear deck of the heavy tank. Armor-piercing rounds found the vehicle's thinner top armor, penetrating into the engine compartment. Black smoke began pouring from the tank as Somerset pulled up. The second pilot, Lieutenant Daniel Rodriguez, spotted another target revealed by Somerset's pass and put both rockets directly into its flank. The tank's ammunition stores detonated, sending its turret spinning 30 feet into the air. For 20 minutes, the 4 Thunderbolts systematically tore the German formation apart, firing rockets to expose concealed vehicles, then following with devastating gun passes. When they finally departed due to low fuel, 11 tanks lay burning in the forest. The counterattack never materialized, and the 90th Infantry advanced without opposition. Those P-47 boys saved at least 300 American lives today, the division commander wrote in his daily report. Enemy force completely neutralized before they could deploy. By April 1945, German forces were in full retreat on all fronts, and the Thunderbolts pursued relentlessly. Somerset, now a captain and flight leader, led his pilots on daily missions against the shrinking German pocket. On April 12th, they caught a retreating column of the 9th SS Panzer Division on an exposed bridge over the Elbe River. "We came in from the east with the sun behind us," Somerset wrote in his mission report. They were bumper to bumper on the bridge and approaches. 4 passes with guns and rockets left the bridge blocked at both ends and 60-plus vehicles in flames. Estimate 500 enemy troops trapped on the span when center section collapsed. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The 365th Fighter Group had flown over 10,000 sorties, claimed 181 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, and thousands of vehicles and other ground targets. They had lost 59 pilots and 83 aircraft, a remarkably low rate considering the hazardous nature of their low-altitude attack missions. Statistics compiled after the war revealed the true impact of the Thunderbolt on the battlefield. From D-Day until the German surrender, P-47s had flown over 500,000 sorties and dropped more than 132,000 tons of bombs. In that period, only 0.7% of Thunderbolts that set out on missions were lost, an extraordinarily low figure for aircraft that routinely operated within range of everything from small arms to heavy anti-aircraft guns. Perhaps most telling was the reaction of German soldiers who had faced the P-47 in combat. In post-war surveys, they consistently ranked the Thunderbolt as the Allied aircraft they most feared, above even dedicated bombers like the B-17 and B-24. One panzer commander summed up the sentiment: the Jabos, fighter bombers, could be anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before our flak could respond. Movement became a calculated risk, often not worth taking. How do you fight an enemy you cannot reach? Captain Merrill Somerset returned to Ohio in September 1945, having completed 112 combat missions. He had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal with 17 clusters, and the Purple Heart for wounds sustained when his aircraft was hit by flak in March. His final tally included 5 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and an estimated 63 vehicles, 9 tanks, and 14 artillery pieces on the ground. Like many pilots, he found the transition to civilian life challenging. The same small town that had once seemed confining now felt peaceful and secure. He enrolled at Ohio State on the GI Bill, completing his engineering degree, and then accepted a position with North American Aviation, helping design the next generation of military aircraft. In 1952, North American asked Somerset to evaluate their new fighter design, the F-100 Super Sabre. After his first flight in the supersonic jet, he wrote in his test report, "Impressive capabilities, but I question its survivability in the ground attack role. No aircraft in current inventory matches the P-47's ability to absorb battle damage and continue flying. This remains a critical requirement for close air support missions." His influence helped shape modifications to the design, adding additional armor protection for critical systems. Later, as a senior engineering consultant, he would advise on the A-10 Thunderbolt II program, an aircraft specifically designed for the close air support role the P-47 had pioneered and named in its honor. Somerset rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, but in 1978 he agreed to an interview for an Air Force historical study on tactical air power. When asked about the unauthorized mission that had changed ground attack tactics, he shrugged it off. "We were just doing our job," he said. "The aircraft deserved most of the credit. The P-47 could do things no other fighter could, take incredible punishment and keep flying, deliver massive firepower on target, and bring its pilot home safely. German pilots laughed at it until they saw what it could do. Then they learned to fear it." In 1984, Somerset attended a reunion of the 365th Fighter Group in Dayton, Ohio. Among the attendees was Harold Gunderson, his wingman from that December mission 40 years earlier. The 2 aging pilots stood beside a restored P-47 at the Air Force Museum, running their hands over its aluminum skin. "Still the most impressive piece of machinery I ever handled," Somerset said quietly. "You know what I remember most?" Gunderson replied. "That sound. When all 850s fired at once like nothing else in the world." Somerset nodded. "The Germans called it the Great Destroyer." Fitting name. A small crowd had gathered around them, mostly younger Air Force officers curious about the massive propeller fighter from another era. "Could one of these really take down a German tank?" one lieutenant asked. Somerset and Gunderson exchanged glances, and both men smiled. "Son," Somerset said, "with 850 caliber machine guns firing 650 rounds per minute each, a P-47 could put over 80 rounds on target in a single second. We weren't just disabling tanks. We were tearing them apart." Merrill Somerset passed away in 1996 at the age of 74. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were scattered from a restored P-47 Thunderbolt over the skies of Ohio. The aircraft performed a missing man formation with 3 others of its kind, a rare gathering of the few airworthy examples remaining. In his personal papers donated to the Air Force Historical Research Agency, researchers found a worn photograph of Somerset standing beside his aircraft in France, winter 1944. On the back, in fading pencil, he had written, "The plane they laughed at, not laughing anymore." The legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt extends far beyond the individual stories of pilots like Somerset. The aircraft fundamentally changed how air power was applied to the battlefield. Before the P-47, ground attack was considered a secondary mission for fighter aircraft, subordinate to their primary role of air-to-air combat. The Thunderbolt's effectiveness demonstrated that tactical air power could directly influence the ground war, sometimes decisively. This lesson was not lost on military planners. In subsequent conflicts from Korea to Vietnam and beyond, ground attack became a primary mission for tactical aircraft. The modern A-10, with its massive Gatling gun and ability to absorb battle damage while delivering precision firepower, is a direct conceptual descendant of the P-47. Perhaps most significantly, the Thunderbolt service record vindicated Republic Aviation's unconventional approach to fighter design. When Alexander Carvelli insisted that size, weight, and firepower were more important than traditional fighter virtues like agility and climb rate, many aviation experts were skeptical. The P-47's combat record proved him right, establishing that different missions required different design priorities. Today, few examples of the P-47 Thunderbolt remain airworthy, perhaps a dozen worldwide. Each represents a 15,000-hour restoration effort, often costing millions of dollars. Yet the enthusiasm for preserving these aircraft remains strong, a testament to their historical significance. At air shows across America, when a restored Thunderbolt roars overhead, the distinctive sound of its massive radial engine still turns heads. Aviation enthusiasts point skyward and tell their children, "That's a Jug, the plane that helped win the war." What makes this story particularly compelling is how thoroughly the P-47 defied expectations. German pilots who initially mocked the massive American fighter as an easy target soon learned to fear its appearance over the battlefield. Allied commanders who questioned its suitability for the European theater came to rely on its unique capabilities. And young pilots like Merrill Somerset, who might have preferred sleeker, more glamorous aircraft, developed a deep appreciation for the Thunderbolt's brutal effectiveness and life-saving durability. The truth about war is that it's rarely won by the most elegant or beautiful weapons, but rather by those that simply get the job done, day after day, mission after mission. The P-47 Thunderbolt, ungainly, overlarge, and lethal, embodied this principle perfectly. What would you have done in Somerset's position that December day in 1944? Faced with a critical target, adverse weather, and orders to stand down? Would you have followed the chain of command or taken the initiative that might change the course of a battle? Would you have risked court-martial to seize a fleeting opportunity? And if you had succeeded, would you have changed tactics across an entire air force? These questions have no easy answers, but they remind us that wars are won not just by technology and tactics, but by the human judgment of those who employ them. Share this story so others remember what courage, initiative, and the right tool at the right moment can accomplish, even when that tool is an aircraft once dismissed as the flying bathtub, but destined to become one of the most formidable weapons of World War II.